stuff. So we're gonna go for the show. We're going to get into our next guest, and hopefully we will have better success. New York State Assemblyman of Nader Sayegh, representing the 90th district, which includes Yonkers. Um, a big supporter of Black Westchester. Um, and I think you can't see it behind me. One of those plaques behind me is from you. One of those up there is from you.
That's right.
One of the proclamations up there is from you. Yeah. So welcome to the show. Welcome to the show.
Well, it's my pleasure. To me, really, I wanted just to first thank my dear friend and really fellow colleague in community activism for many years, Lorraine Lopez, for the invite. And I just wanted to say that, the award behind you is not only most deserving, Mr. Woodson, but it also recognizes the work Black Westchester has done for many years in promoting an awareness of what the needs are in the community and what we as citizens in every capacity we serve and hold to do to make it better. And before my years in politics, Lorraine knows I'm a lifelong educator, and to me, education and especially the issues we deal with in Yonkers and in urban education and the impact it has on children of color and the proper programs and services and funding is very important for me. So thank you for the opportunity to be on the show. And although my name will appear on the ballot this November 3rd, fortunately for me, I'm unopposed. But Lorraine knows my attitude is when you take on an oath to serve, you got to be active at all times. And Lorraine knows I've been very active, and my goal is to continue to be active, whether opposed or unopposed. So this for me is very important and it's special. And I thank Black Westchester for the opportunity.
I thank you for that. I thank you for that. And just so you know, you have a strong advocate in Lorraine Lopez. She is always championing you. And I know most of what you do and what's going on. Definitely make sure that she keeps me updated on everything
Well, I
this show, what
appreciate
you're
that.
doing and stuff like that. So give you credit though, and I want to give you credit also for wanting to appear on the show because a lot of people when they don't have an opponent, you really don't have to campaign. Yeah. You really, I mean, it's a shoe-in. Once you won the primary, you just ease on down the yellow brick road to the general election. But the fact that you still wanted to address the people and address the issues when you really don't have to, I think that's admirable.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, anybody that knows our social media campaign is probably, sets the standard every week, to nearly 8,000 residents of my district in Yonkers. We sent out an update on all the issues, the concerns, special information. It's all part of an effort to make sure that the residents of Yonkers know about state programs, state services, policies, changes, holidays, initiatives, because I think all of us agree in whatever we do, whether we educate children, we get involved with the media, we go out in the streets and protest or indicate, publicly what our concerns are, it all ends up benefiting, those in need. And I think we all recognize that there's many individuals in our community that are disadvantaged, people that are disenfranchised because of who they are, because of the color of their skin, because of their ethnicity, their economic status. And I often tell my listening audience, I grew up on Buena Vista and Waverly Street, and I grew up, all my life part of Yonkers Public Schools. Yonkers Public Schools, that's right. And I tell individuals, my upbringing, family of 8 siblings, and my father died a young man. So I grew up, disadvantaged, and I grew up, especially as an Arab American, listening to a lot of derogatory remarks, camel driver and sand nigger and so forth. So, I tell individuals that's part of my life so they understand no matter what I've done or what I've achieved in my life, my history speaks for itself. And, my commitment, especially to education, having served as a principal for some 30 years in the Yonkers Public Schools, predominantly working with children of color, and the initiatives we put in place, to encourage parents to be involved in education, to make sure that children with learning disabilities, that their issues were addressed, to make sure that bilingual children, and I served in schools where 80% of the student population was Latino and Black students. So I did my share. And the reason we speak up is to really say, let's find best practices. Let's find out what works best to give everybody a fair share in the business world, in the educational field, and to really, even if it means encouraging legislation and changing legislation, to do so. And the way to do so is what you're doing. That's why I compliment media, especially media that really takes the extra step to really become unbiased and inform the listening audience of what they need to know. And as a legislator in the state, I tell all my friends, all the constituents, state policy starts with the state assembly. So if there's issues, there's concerns that need to be addressed, that need to be even changed, it starts through changing legislation, and that's where the assembly plays a major role. So to listen in audience, whether you feel there's something that needs to change in policy that impacts schools or education or healthcare, reach out to my office, reach out to the assembly office. If it's something that's federal, reach out to your federal delegation. If it's something that impacts local government here in city of Yonkers, then you reach out to your city council person, you reach out to the mayor or county government. I wish and I hope that, through the services of media, we can communicate and let the public listening audience know that they need to speak up. They need to know how legislation is conducted on every level, and they need to know when their voices are loud and clear, that matters the most. And this week, the focus is on getting out the vote and making sure that every single individual registers to vote. And if they're registered, they must vote. There's no excuses for not voting. You have absentee ballot, you have early voting, you have election day voting. So anybody that tells you that I really don't have time is full of it, in all honesty. So this time I'm hoping that we get at least a 75, 80% of registered voters that will vote this presidential race.
Absolutely, absolutely. Lorraine, you want to kick off the question?
No, no, it's amazing. I'm listening to the assemblyman, and he didn't say it. He said education, but assemblyman was actually superintendent of schools in the city of Yonkers. And prior to that, he was a principal in school 13 in Southwest Yonkers as well. And the educator in him is there still because he's educated. He just gave us the whole education on 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 not politics, but on getting involved and civics. He just gave us a whole education on
Civics.
who to go to, as far as who your elected official is, and thank you for that. Thank you for that, because we have elected officials that come here and they say, I do this and I do that and I do this and I do that. And you're saying, well, it's not just I. We have a Congress, we have a Senate, we have a city council, we have a mayor. And those are all important, and everyone can assist you. And those are resources that you need to reach out to, and I appreciate that. I
That's
also
my
want to say that the assemblyman, like I said, he's running on the polls, but I don't know of any other elected official that has been out there on the state level or or at the county level that has done so much during COVID. I mean, Assemblyman Sayegh doesn't have to be out there, but he's out there. He gives out the PPEs. He gives the food. He just co-sponsored a huge event over here at Cross County on Saturday, and I took my grandson there, and he had his, he had his area set up, and he doesn't have to do none of that, and they serve over 1,200 children and families, and he doesn't have to do that. You see, he's running on a post, but he's working every day as if I have to do better because my constituents need to see that I'm delivering for them because that's why they voted for me. That's why they put me in office. It's like I said, he could sit back. I know assemblymen that have not come out at all. You haven't seen them during COVID. They can sit back because they're running unopposed. People don't even know they exist anymore. Nader J, Assemblyman Sayegh, he's out there, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that as a resident of Yonkers, that he's serving us, that he's doing what he needs to do.
Thank you, Lorraine. Appreciate that.
You're welcome, sir. Dr.
Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob is an educator as well.
Yes, and
where are
Professor?
You, Robert?
Well, you know what? I'm happy to say that I'm teaching in the City University and also at Lehman College. I'm teaching so I know we have a shared history in that respect. I'm teaching a movements class there.
Well, Lehman College is where I earned my bachelor's. I went to WCC, earned my bachelor's at Lehman, went to NYU, a master's from Fordham University, a law degree from Pace Law. But, the reason I'm mentioning that is because, the message we want to continue to give our kids. When I say our kids, that diversified flavor. I've always been an advocate of multiculturalism and diversity. And I've learned, we've learned, my brothers and sisters, as difficult as we've had it, that, there is opportunity out there, but the opportunity has to be taken advantage of. And as long as we take advantage of the opportunity, then we allow our children a place and time to be decision makers and to be children that grow up into viable careers and really take a lead. And I've been in Yonkers many, many years where, I've seen transitions, good transitions, where we see a more cross representation in city government. We see more diversity in professors. We see more diversity in our teaching force. And lately we've been pushing, and we see a little bit more diversity in our police force and fire department. And the message there is, and I've always been an advocate of supporting efforts to hire minorities and make sure that whenever a community puts in whatever position it may be, a diversified workforce, it serves the community better. So that may require legislation. Sometimes it requires the community reaching out to our representatives and saying, we want a bigger voice. We want more diversity. We want to make sure that there's more firefighters and teachers that represent the cross section of our community. So again, Black Westchester, is known. That's why when I issued the proclamation, it was because I strongly believe that the show and the individuals on the show, is instrumental in sending out that message. And lately, with the Board of Education and the issues with virtual learning and technology, my office worked together with community groups to bring together parents, predominantly many non-English speaking parents, to teach them how to use the technology so they can work with their children. And that's really a build-up to many years of supporting adult education programs and making sure that the parents were able to not only learn basic English, but at least to be in a position to help their kids with their education and be involved with learning.
Absolutely.
Dr. Bob?
Yes, Assemblyman Sayegh, it's a special honor for me to be able to talk to you because, as you know, I reside in your district and have had the opportunity, the pleasure to see you in the neighborhood at various times over the past couple of years. And I wanted to know if maybe you could give the audience members an update on, what you've been able to do for your first 2 years in office. What kind of legislative accomplishments? I know that many of them are discussed on your site. I think there are some really key, important ones here, and I wanted to give you opportunity maybe to bring the audience up to date.
Thank you very much. In my 2 years, I'm finishing my second year, and even though people say, "Well, Nader, this is your first term," as I said earlier, I have a 40-plus year history in education and law and government and civic. My involvement, for many years with the Spanish Community Progress Foundation, with the NAACP, with practically every commission and board, volunteer service, 40 years of service. So when I went up to Albany, I felt that I was going up there and competing when it comes to tenure and seniority. I was one of the persons that many legislators were reaching out to because I made myself the voice of reason, and I made myself the person who's the consensus builder between the issues that impact New York City, that impacts upstate New York, and here in Yonkers and Westchester. I can say that my record in my first term is one that I can tell the listening audience I've never missed one day of session, not one single day in 2 years. And I've had the pleasure of sponsoring my own legislation, nearly 40 bills, some that have been passed, that deal with health care, that deal with education, that deal with criminal justice reforms, that deal with women's rights, with immigrants' rights, because these are issues I was confronted with. So I didn't go up there to spend a session or a year or 2 years or a term to learn the process. All I needed to know was where the offices were, who were the key players, and I was on the go. So when I went to Albany, I got to say, nearly 400 pieces of legislation were co-sponsored by myself, and the initiatives we undertook, the Democrat majority in the New York State Assembly and Senate undertook major reforms. The first one is criminal justice reform, bail reform, where people that were sent to jail because they couldn't afford bail, there was more fairness in the process. When the process needed a little tweaking, we were part of the element that brought law enforcement together with community and government representatives and said, hey, now that we have bail reform, how do we make it better? How do we make it work better so that, as great as the fairness and the equity with bail reform, how do we make sure that serious criminals or repeat offenders don't think that it's an easy way to go in and out and commit repeated crimes? We took a serious initiative with the Green Light Bill, where for many years we thought that the only migrant or immigrant workers were in Southern California and New Mexico in the southern part of the state. But many New Yorkers don't even know that the amount of laborers, immigrant laborers in upstate New York that are the fuel of the upstate economy with dairy products and cheeses and wines. And these workers, if they weren't given the opportunity to have a driver's license, would have a difficult time even going to work. We passed that legislation. We passed legislation to protect women's rights, to protect the LGBTQ community. And the reason we're mentioning that is to say the last 2 years probably have been the most active in the New York State Assembly. Do I take full credit for that? No. But I can tell you I was in the midst of it. I was in the middle of it. And I took a role in making sure that while we pushed this legislation, we did so in a way that respected all segments of our community. That's in a nutshell some of the extensive work, that we've done in the first term. And now that I know the nuts and bolts of Albany even more so, expect a lot more. We're looking at legislation with regards to drag racing. And I'm the person that tells the community, speak up, because if something is bothering you and it's a community issue, it's a matter that could be legislatively corrective, let's do it. So drag racing was crucial. We're looking at pharmacies and making sure that in today's time, with large pharmacies doing vaccinations and doing shingle shots and flu shots, that legislation allows them to make sure that the customer's family practitioner knows and has notice of those shots. Because many people go to the doctors and the doctor doesn't have what CVS or Walgreens has on their records. So if the doctor tells the patient, have you had a flu shot? Have you had a shingle shot? Very often they forget and they don't know. Or even to put on prescription bottles a better description of the pills, so that seniors and other individuals that have trouble knowing which medications they're taking can now make it easier for them to identify and take their medicine. These are type of initiatives that I got from speaking to individuals that said, Assemblyman, I have a problem with this matter. And I'll sit with them and say, well, tell me more about it. I've spoken to doctors that are now reaching out in healthcare, and nursing home executives and hospital administrators that are giving me input, and that input translates into new sponsorship of legislation to change the way law is written and the way law is applied in New York State. And people say, wow, is it that simple? It's not easy, but it is simple when you think about what it takes to change. So not only are we teaching kids in high school how to be more civically involved and understand the importance of registering to vote, we change legislation that allows high school kids when they're 17-year-old to register. So before they go to colleges, they're already registered to vote. We've changed voter registration where now it's easier for people to vote by paper ballot, absentee ballot. You don't even need an excuse anymore. The early voting, the drop-off voting ballots. We've seen in Yonkers, New York, the last 2 days, lines are going around the voting areas because, to me, I'm so grateful to that, because we've seen democracy deteriorating here in America, where whether it's a primary, 5-10% of people come out to vote, or a general election, we're lucky if 30-40%, maybe in a presidential 45-50%. I'm hoping this race, at least 70% of all registered voters come out to vote. And that should be the standard for primaries, for special elections, for general elections, for presidential as well as non-presidential. So this is really a new time. It's a new era. We're dealing with COVID, but there's also a lot of positive things going on. And at the end of the day, no matter which way the presidential race goes, which way the Senate goes, the assembly, races at all level, we all should fall back to the mode of we're one country, we're one society. We should all work together to get rid of the polarization and the division that has really been the worst I've seen in many years.
So, Assemblyman,
we are definitely divided.
Yeah, I saw up close and personal the rather stunningly long lines that all across Westchester County yesterday. And while, like you, I am heartened to see the large numbers of people who are turning out, one of the sources of alienation from our political system is the barriers to voting and participation that seem to be deliberately erected, especially in communities of color. In light of these massive lines, I wonder what kind of discussions members of the New York State Legislature are having along with the governor to see if we can, institute some sort of reforms that are going to reduce those lines, because we're all exercising, I think, perseverance when we decide to get out there and go early. I told AJ yesterday, Lorraine, I was communicating with them, but I got online at the Groton Library at 10:30 and didn't leave till 2:30. There were hundreds of people lined up, and my fear is that if we don't see some sort of reforms and an increase in the resources for our elections, that people may once again be turned off. So are you and your colleagues in the state legislature considering reforms and allocation of additional resources to make the voting process easier?
But see, you're right, Doc. New York State, many of the changes that took place, with regards to voter reforms, have been initiated the last 2 years. One of my bills dealt with making sure that any voting district that has more than 5% of a certain ethnic or language requirement, for example, Spanish, here in Westchester and Yonkers is predominantly Spanish. That's important. In some areas, Arabic. In some areas, Albanian. You go to certain communities in New York City, it's Chinese, it's Vietnamese, it's Urdu. The point we've made through the legislation was to make sure that any district that has 5% or more must have a speaker of that language at that polling place. We also made sure that we allowed for more funding this past 2 years, to accommodate what we believe would be an extra amount of people voting. The extra days was really all part of a new initiative. The extra absentee ballot, where in the past you needed permission that you were in the hospital, you were sick, you were in the military, you were out of state. Now anyone, there's no restriction on doing an absentee paper ballot. The early drop-off boxes are also another initiative. Now, to your point, we're looking at all these reforms already in place, and we're saying, well, what works and what doesn't work. And from my end as a legislator, to your point, I'm looking at the numbers and saying, is 2 voting locations in a city like Yonkers enough? Now I can say from experience, no, it's not enough. We have the Wills Library in Larkin. A community like Yonkers should have, at the very least, in my opinion, 6 places that should be convenient, that should be identified. And if it requires, because the Board of Elections is looking at us and saying, hey, you want us to do a lot more if you don't give us the funds to do so. So from that end, I understand what the commissioners at the Board of Ed are saying to us here from Westchester and throughout the state. So it's going to be a combination of making sure we look at this election, we analyze the good points, because honestly, there was a lot of progress, in my opinion, with making voting more accessible and making it easier for more people to vote. But to your point also, we're recognizing that although there's a lot of good initiatives in place, we need to do a little bit more. So I am making my notes, whether it's voter registration, whether it's the long lines, whether it's inequities with the count. We're not even concerned, how the process would unfold election night. I don't even think in many cases we will know election night what happens. So what is the process? There's Supreme Court and appellate division cases going out throughout the nation that puts a limit on votes received after election day. And whether that's a mistake with the postal service for the delay, if somebody voted in a timely fashion, that vote should be should be counted. So does legislation need to be put in place? And people will say, maybe that's the way to resolve it. And I've always been an advocate of, we in New York have not only been progressive with our social justice initiatives, I think more than any other state in the nation, I think we take the lead. And this is something, from your mouth to a legislator's ears, to the rest of the Democrat majority, and hopefully to a change in how we proceed with voter registration, voter procedures, voter input and turnout, and even how we count votes at the end of the day, becomes matters that we can review, analyze, and put forth legislation so that it doesn't happen the next cycle down the line.
And in that vein, I just wanted to point out to our readers, our viewers, I'm sorry, that even though New York has a reputation as being an ultra liberal state, the truth of the matter is that there were several counties in New York that were covered under the Justice Department's previous pre-clearance redistricting procedures, if I'm not mistaken, because of past patterns of discrimination. Westchester County was not one of them, but many of our sister counties to the south were covered, and it suggests that as we see changing demographics, we need to redouble our effort to make sure at the state level that those kind of institutional barriers are not going to prevent people from getting out and making their political preferences known. And so I want to applaud you and your colleagues in the state for those reforms that you have made, and urge you to continue to make additional ones in light of some of the challenges that we've seen over the week.
Of course. No, definitely. I think it's the most core part of democracy, and sometimes we don't realize it. Sometimes in Yonkers, Lorraine knows many of our people are immigrants from other parts of the world, and some of us came from cities and countries where you couldn't speak your say, and in many ways you had some sort of totalitarian governments in place. So politics and having a say weren't the norm. It's something we were taught here, and something that some of us that were in many ways the early pioneers in civic responsibility, and it was a teaching process, and it was a process where we had to reach out to these immigrant families that were educating their children, and their main effort was, let me survive, let me provide for my family. They worked 2-3 jobs, and they educated their children. So it was that generation that we had to basically instill in them the concept of democracy here in America, and the opportunity to have a say and speak up. And honestly, speaking for the many individuals I've reached out to over the years, once we got them to register to vote, then I was amazed that, they voted 80-90% of the time. Their percentage of vote and turnout was amazing, more than your traditional voters that were coming out 30-40%, maybe in a presidential 50%. So, and I tell individuals, don't underestimate the immigrant communities, that you got to cherish and respect who they are. I went to Southwest Yonkers, and I can tell you, like I said earlier on the show, that's where my family grew up, and that's where I grew up, and that's where our livelihood was early on. And I see generations of different ethnic groups that come to the same turf, and what some people left as what they perceived as a deteriorated part of the city, these new immigrants and ethnic groups came in. They rented these empty stores, they invested in them, they renovated them, whether it's the local taco place or the stationery or the other place. They came and they really made it viable again. And to me, I love it. I love it because I see the pattern, and I say to them, what they're doing is right. It's not some secret formula. I tell everybody I talk to, and I tell them my history to say, you're no different than what I've gone through. And this is what you can achieve if this is what you work at. And some of it involves, belonging to religious organizations or civic or cultural, or belonging to something, and teaching your children cultural values, respecting who you are. Years ago, it was almost un-American if you spoke Spanish or you spoke Arabic or you talked about a different ethnicity or culture. And now we're recognizing that it's great to recognize and respect who you are. And I think it gives you more strength as a citizen of this country to succeed when you appreciate who you are. And I tell students all along, from years ago, was a big advocate of dual language programs and multiculturalism. We made sure kids learned Spanish and learned Arabic and learned as many foreign languages as possible, because I know, as someone who recognizes global awareness, how important it is, and how the rest of the world, you go to Europe, you go to the Middle East, you go to Latin America, the Far East, nobody speaks less than two languages. And the average is between 2 and 3 languages that people speak. So I tell our students and parents, make sure your children don't forget Spanish. Make sure they take languages courses. Make sure they don't forget Arabic. I've been here over 60 years, and I'm glad, even though I've never attended school and learned Arabic formally, that I still speak Arabic. And I speak a little bit Spanish because I recognize the importance of being a principal with a large Latin population. That, yes, and I tell doctors, can you become a successful medical doctor in a city like Yonkers and not speak Spanish in addition to English?
Well, I hope my colleagues will indulge me one last question.
Sure.
In reviewing your legislative accomplishments, one of the things that I noticed was that you were singled out by a lot of media for the decisive vote that you cast on a legislative issue that really is at the center of the crisis that we're facing right now, the COVID crisis. I believe the bill was, and here, what which bill?
The vaccination bill?
Yes, the vaccination bill. And, I wanted, to give you an opportunity, maybe just to describe, it's a very sensitive matter, but nevertheless, one that concerns the health and well-being of not just Yonkers or New York State, but the entire country, indeed the global community. And I wanted to know, give you a chance.
Sure, no, but I appreciate it because that was a very difficult bill, and when the state assembly and senate were debating the bill, I myself early on took a very strong stand on the constitutional aspects of it to say that constitutionally, individuals' rights should be protected and parental choice should be protected in general. So I was debating early on and saying, hey, I'm a person who myself is vaccinated. I have 5 children that are vaccinated, all attended the public schools. So when I told the elements or the people out there that were strongly fighting against vaccination, I said, look, early on, I support vaccination, but I also support constitutional rights, parental rights. So I said to them, look, if a parent has a real legitimate reason, and many of them were saying they had health reasons that their children would be harmed, I said there should be medical exemptions because at the end of the day, none of us want to see a child hurt, by vaccinations. Having said that, I said, look, we're dealing at the time with alarming situations that dealt with government agencies in Rockland and elsewhere coming to us and saying there's a serious pandemic, with the growth in the virus, and vaccinations was extremely necessary for the betterment of the general public. So when I spoke to many in healthcare, and thank God Lorraine knows I have many family members that are medical doctors in healthcare, they were in large numbers telling me, Nader, this is really crucial, that the spread of the virus is severe and that it's becoming a serious health hazard. Then at the time, I said to people in Rockland government, show me that there's an overreach and need, government need, and that overrides parental rights, then I would support it. So when I did vote for change, I voted for the vaccination to be heard on the floor. Some people say, well, why did you allow that? Because an issue as severe as vaccination deserved to be heard on the floor of the Assembly and the Senate, and it deserved to be voted on. So in my opinion, it was a close call. Today, with the problems we're having, it even, as you said earlier, Dr. Bob, it makes it even more important that we address vaccinations. If there's a vaccine for COVID-19 and it becomes an urgent problem that impacts a serious spread, should we demand the vaccination? Should we tell children you're not allowed to go to school unless you get the COVID-19 vaccination? Should we also allow parents that legitimately, not religious values or religious beliefs, but real medical exemptions, real concerns where it's known that if this child gets X vaccination, that they would seriously be harmed, then yes, I do support medical exemptions, and I feel they should be made available for cases where a child is known to be potentially severely harmed if they get the vaccination. But still, if we as a nation, as a community, are confronted with a situation where vaccines are mandatory, then I do support that. And I think, if we get to this point, we got to make it mandatory. Look at chicken pox. Look at polio. The only reason we got rid of chicken pox and polio over the years is because of vaccinations. And is there cases where some people, get harmed by it? Yes. And in those cases, that's why we should have medical exemptions. But vaccinations, when proven to be worthy, are a necessity when we are in a period as we are today with COVID-19. So we haven't heard the end of vaccinations. I'm sure once the vaccine is out, and I'm sure there's plans to give it to those in most in need or high risk populations. But if the need becomes to give it widespread, then that's going to be another debatable issue. And it's something, honestly, again, I would support if it's in the best interest of the majority of New Yorkers, or in this case, Americans in general.
And I'll be doing the same. So long as scientific protocols are followed, I think we can all be relatively rest assured that it will be safe and efficacious, and I'm going to be the first on the line.
Sounds good. But I wanted just to, again, stress. What was that?
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted
go ahead.
again to
Sorry.
thank Black Westchester and to say, as we said earlier, although unopposed, my commitment to my goal, or my oath that I took when I pledged to be an assemblyman, and was to do it full time and to do it, with my heart and soul. And part of my extensive involvement, as Lorraine can attest to, is really part of the commitment I have had even before the assembly. Anybody that has known me in the community for 40 plus years, I've always, as I said, served on numerous capacities as a volunteer. I wanted to make sure that we had every opportunity to give back to our communities, and we wanted, our constituents to know, that yes, I'm your assemblyman. I'm working hard. I'm out there. We're legislating. The office is never closed, even during the pandemic time. I was blessed with a staff that really, whether virtual, helped hundreds of people with unemployment claims when they were having difficulty
Excellent
during,
staff. Yes.
yeah, with the pandemic. We made sure small business applications, we helped individuals. And as I said earlier, if somebody came to my assembly office and the matter was a federal matter dealing with immigration or somebody out of the country or whatever that needed, the congressional or U.S. Senate offices to be involved, we hooked them up with that office. If it's something that required a local situation involved in the city of Yonkers or DPW, then we found out where they lived and we hooked them up to their local council person. If it's something that was a county related matter, to the county government. And as we said earlier in the show, the more we as a constituent body, the more the residents of Yonkers and Westchester County understand the working of government, understand who their representatives are, understand how to voice their concerns, how to seek information and help, the better it is. And that's been the biggest problem in society. We don't address the homeless problem the way we should. We don't address the children with special ed needs the way we should. I often look at solutions that are more comprehensive, that if you wanted to really get someone into a real positive lifeline, you got to help them sometimes with job development skills. You got to help them making sure they have, at the very least, a high school equivalency, a GED. You want to make sure they have life skills. If they need child support or parental skills, you want to provide that for them. So at the end of the day, you give that individual the tools to help themselves. And that's what we as a society sometimes forget. We get upset with people that are in the high need category. We get upset sometimes when we see individuals that are homeless. But how do you address that problem? You can't just put them in a shelter. You got to make sure you give them the additional support services. Even for adults, we know as educators that a child's education is best when you provide and you complement the learning atmosphere with the special skills, the music, the art, the sports, the library, but also the support services. If they need counseling, if they need special education, if they need bilingual education, if they need mental counseling and support services. So the message really, and this message is more so to people in power, to government officials, to agency directors, that when they put their grants together, they put their budgets together, think of solutions that are more comprehensive. And the reason I focused on the homeless is because all I hear sometimes is, well, let's find a shelter and that resolves it. That doesn't resolve it by itself. So I hope those that are listening look at that as a guiding model or a mechanism whenever they legislate, whenever they seek solutions, look at the more comprehensive.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you a quick question. You talking about
Sure.
COVID and everything, and I know the federal government is going back and forth trying to put these bills together, to give money to the people that need it. Is there something that you can do as an assemblyman on a state level for especially small business stuff? Because I know small businesses are crumbling, and sometimes our government right now is failing us. So I don't know if that's a state issue. If there's things that small businesses can come to their assemblyman or their state senator to, for some kind of assistance.
No, definitely. Small business is crucial. And, some of the biggest problems we've had through COVID-19 is the issue of closing the economy versus finding some sort of middle ground, and that's what we as legislators, to protect small businesses, reached out to the governor's office early on and said, look, although we strongly support the whole process of making sure we wear face masks and we sanitize and so forth and distance. And at the same time, we help develop, if you recall, the 5 phases where the state can either open or close the economy and businesses based on the number of cases that a specific area in the state or a county has. And the reason we did that is because, in communities in other parts of the state where they had less than 1%, of a rate of increase of COVID cases, there was no reason to close the economy. And recently, when the issue became, we had a case of movie industry, for example, that was ready to close their doors. They said, look, we can't sustain this anymore. We reached out and said, is there a way? And based on the same with religious organizations and services, we have, as of last Friday, an opportunity for theaters to open up again in Westchester, 25% capacity.
Right.
So if they do the temperature and they make sure everybody that comes into the theater has the mask and they set the seating as churches do now. So when you walk into church now, it's based on a 25% capacity, which is something we push the state to do. When the state first came out and they said, no religious organization less than 25 individuals, I made a point with state officials at the time to say, what do you mean? If you have 25 people at a small chapel somewhere and you have 25 people at St. Patrick's Cathedral, is that the same? And they said, whoa, something's wrong there. That's how we push the 25% capacity, because if I have an institution that has seating for 1,000 people, don't give me 25 and give somebody that has capacity for 50, 25. That's not ethical. So, we're supporting big business, as I said, with the applications. I have one of my bills that protects businesses that were hurt because of the pandemic and the COVID-19, and even businesses that were hurt during, if you recall, the protest, and some businesses were looted and vandalized in Manhattan and elsewhere. We wanted those businesses, if their businesses were hurt as a result, to have some sort of compensation to get them back on their feet. Now, we're looking at a country and we're looking at our state and community where we're really walking the fine balance. Even though New York State, most of our state is in compliance, we're still terrified with what's going on, the rise of COVID cases, the rise of death all throughout the nation. So we can't let our guard down. At the same time, let's make sure we don't force local businesses out of business. And honestly, when I go up and down Central Avenue or Southwest Yonkers or McLean Avenue or some of the main streets and areas, we see a lot of closed businesses. Some of them are never coming back, whether that's, a COVID related, whether it's going to be long term. Me as a legislator, my goal is the safety, the health and well-being of New Yorkers and Yonkers people, and also to make sure that we find a balance so that we don't destroy our economic base. And then, just to another point, I was talking to Lorraine the other day. When the COVID-19 crisis took place, and we were focusing on New Rochelle as the epicenter, I was the first legislator to demand that the governor's office in the state look at Southwest Yonkers. We knew with our vicinity and closeness to New York City, and we know that it's almost impossible to have effective distancing in a community where you have nearly 6 to 8 residents living in an apartment in a densely populated, economically disadvantaged sector of our city. So we pushed on that and we demanded, how we knew? Because we reached out to the source, to medical doctors and practices and hospital ERs that were giving us reads that were as high as 50% positive COVID-19 cases. So we use that information even before the state recognized to demand, and the state then opened up additional testing sites in Southwest Yonkers. So this is part of being proactive. This is part of saying, if you're looking for medical data, I go to the source. I go to the local doctor offices. I go to the local ERs and say, tell me what's going on. How many cases? I know before the state knows, what the pattern is developing. That's the key, to be more proactive, to be more comprehensive, and to really stay visible and active. So if anybody else, my fellow legislators, are listening, that's the model. What I consider, when you take an oath to represent, this is what you should commit yourself to.
Absolutely. We have one last question from Yonkers, from Nicole Benjamin. She said, Mr. Assemblyman, what is the state doing to push the county and the city to meet the New York State MWBE 30% contracting good faith mandate, especially in the light of COVID?
Well, that's a good question, Nicole. And, we legislated, we passed legislation. We passed legislation at the state level dealing with the, any support bills for the women's and minority-owned businesses. And, in my meetings with county legislators and my meetings with the county executive and with members of the state delegation, and even without the outreach to local representatives, the office of the mayor and elsewhere, we're always pushing to make sure that when there's development in the southwest portion of the city or other parts of the county, that rather than the 5-10% affordable housing, rather than making sure that all the businesses go to the traditional investors and developers, that there should be a good faith effort to make sure that X percent, and an increase, not a 5-10%, but more reflective of the makeup of the communities we live in, should be incorporated. So when we negotiate with the developers and the investors, I'm reasonable enough to know there's a certain margin that a developer or an investor needs to achieve to get into a project. So we got to find that middle ground, whether it's increasing the 5-10% to 20-30%, if we can go higher, then fine. But we got to find that middle ground that allows an investor and a developer to say, you know what, it's still worth my while. Let me go ahead with this project and put forth the effort to make sure that whether it's hiring practices, that we hire residents from our local community, that we have key positions. I'm not talking about, low-level type of positions, key management and upper-level management positions that are given to people of color and women, so that it becomes a workforce, as I keep saying, that's more reflective of the community we serve. So, Nicole, definitely a crucial issue, definitely an issue that in the last 2 years, I believe there's been progress on the front, as they say, but I think we got to continue to keep the local and county and state people on board, so that when they do negotiate programs and development and events, that they do so with this initiative in mind.
Well, I personally want to thank you for taking your time to come on the show. It's interesting. I had a lot of questions, but you answered many of them before I could answer. And definitely appreciated the civics lesson, because I don't think we're taught enough civics. We don't teach, and we talk about education or a student. I think more civics should be taught in school, because what happens is, when I find out, especially here in Mount Vernon, everywhere, if they don't teach it in schools, then the kids become adults and they don't teach their kids. So we have a lot of people that don't know. So that civics lesson, I always appreciate that method more. We try to do it here, and we need more of that from our elected officials, and we need to incorporate that into our community and in our school some kind of way. Whether we have town hall forums or whatever, civics is very important to a more informed electorate. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's good. So I just want to thank you. You know, I learned a lot. I sat here and listened, and like I said, you answered a lot of my questions before I asked them. But I want to thank you for coming and for the job that you're doing, and that you and make sure, you know, there's an open door. Anytime you have an issue you need to address, definitely get in touch with us and get in touch with Lorraine, and you know, we'll make it happen.
Well, thank you very much. And again, wanted to congratulate you, Mr. Woodson, on the awards you recently received. Most deserving. And Dr. Bob,
Thank you, thank you.
thank you very much. And you know, the fellow educators here, you know, communicating and Lorraine, you know, thank you for the opportunity. And you know, Lorraine is an advocate that has a long history in our community, and you know, I seek advice from her, and you know, we piggyback on each other's experiences, and we keep motivating each other. Sometimes when we feel that we're down on situations and issues, we need each other, whether it's through expressing our views on the show or and other media courses, you know, to stay on course. And even though life has ups and downs, as long as we continue to rise up. So keep it up. And again, I appreciate it. And hopefully we'll get to talk more on the show.
Assemblyman, before you go, I had the pleasure and honor to vote for you yesterday. For those that still have to go, what line are you on the ballot?
I'm on the Democrat
I know you're on the
line.
Democrat.
I'm on the Democrat line, and you know, as I said, I'm unopposed, but my goal is to really, you know, continue to work very hard to motivate everyone to come out and vote, and you know, vote your conscience, and vote who you feel is most deserving, most qualified, and you know, when you leave that voting booth, you should really feel happy and feel that, you know, as we said earlier on the show, you practice the most important principle of democracy. And no matter from where you grew up and where you came from, you know, this is something that we cherish here in America. And in my opinion, that's the greatest way to exhibit your voice, by voting. So no matter how much you complain and how loud you speak, if at the end of the day you don't vote election day, your voice is not heard. So make sure you vote. You have every opportunity with early voting, with paper ballot, election day voting. Even though we still have reforms to fix it more, a lot has been done to make it easier for you to vote. So do vote, and encourage everybody around you. Sometimes we go out and vote, but you know, we don't help our elderly citizen or parents or grandparents or children to come out and vote. Make sure at the end of the day you make a list of everybody that you know, everybody you're affiliated with, and you help them go out and vote.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. We're coming to the close of the show. Lorraine, Bob, any last words? Any last words before we go?